You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
John Rash is a writer and columnist for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and he also teaches mass media and politics at the University of Minnesota's School of Journalism. John, welcome back to Access Minnesota.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
John, in March you flew to Kuwait to follow the Employment Resource Team. The ERT was bringing together professionals from Minnesota state agencies and corporations to help the Minnesota National Guard combat unemployment for returning veterans. Tell us more about that experience. What caused you to want to follow that team in the first place?
It was a really remarkable experience, Jim, and Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Olson, as well as some senior leaders of the National Guard, had put together this unprecedented trip to Kuwait with the Employment Resource Team. And no state had ever done this, and the Pentagon itself had never sent a delegation like this into what is still technically a combat zone. And so I went as an embedded reporter with the Employment Resource Team because certainly at the Star-Tribune and writing for the editorial page, we realized the remarkable contributions that Minnesota National Guard members have made in the post-9/11 era, as well as throughout their long and distinguished history. And yet we, as many others, were quite taken with a study from the Department of Employment and Economic Development that up to 19% of returning veterans would come back without a job. And so we went to cover the soldiers themselves, as well as the ERT, Employment Resource Team, and the efforts they would make to try to get them ready for employment reintegration.
How good of a job or not do you think the media has done covering the struggles of returning veterans from an employment perspective?
In general, I think they've done a very good job. There is some challenge for the media, as there is for the National Guard, as there is for National Society, because the advancements in what we know about the psychological and mental health of returning soldiers is better than at any previous conflict. And it's been well documented. That's a small percentage, but sizable enough to report on, have come back facing some challenges. And so anytime you have more knowledge than in previous conflicts and you have a significant amount of people, you're going to have to figure out how to best reflect that and report that. So, but in general, I think that the coverage has been good, I would argue, for the nation as a whole. So not necessarily just Minnesota, but the country. There could or should have been more coverage in the last year or so of the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Pew Center for Project for Excellence in Journalism estimated that the amount of coverage to military matters in the Mideast had gone down to about 1% to 2% in the most recent year. And certainly most people think that when we send our young men and women into harm's way, they deserve more coverage than that.
That's a very interesting point. It seemed like the media interest in the Iraq War, at least, was piqued once again when the realization hit the media that this is the drawdown. At the end of December, the U.S. will be out of Iraq. And there was quite a bit of coverage of at least the final 2 weeks of that conflict. Do you think perhaps some of the struggles that the veterans are having in the employment sphere may be due to the fact that we don't really know that much about people who serve in the military anymore, that it's more of a mystery because such a small percentage of the population actually serves or even knows someone who serves?
I think that's a key point. And the percentage of people who either have family members or directly went over there is at a very low point in our nation's history because, of course, we don't have any kind of a draft that's there. Now, what has changed, much more from a positive perspective, is the image of our servicemen and women is perhaps at an post-World War II high. And, you know, many are the story, including some people I spoke to at the Guard, about the reception and the perception that people had of them when they returned from the Vietnam-era conflict. And the change in how the public perceives the men and women who go over there is for the good. But they often are not as well covered within the media, and that could be part of the challenge many of them face. There are, of course, many other challenges, including a lot of the young people who have gone over there, never really got their career started or haven't been able to complete school, and so they come back, and it's often very challenging to get back on track as well as match the military skills with civilian skills, and to be able to translate that from a linguistic and a resume perspective.
When you spoke to the soldiers in Kuwait, did they seem very confident of the skills that they had garnered through the Guard?
They really did. They had a requisite amount of Midwestern modesty, and yet all of them were very proud of the Red Bulls and the Minnesota National Guard, and really felt that they had had a life-changing experience, had learned a tremendous amount, and that they could be great assets to any kind of employers. But as mentioned before, sometimes it's hard, when they're used to the collective, to express that as an individual. And of course, if I'm sitting in front of you trying to get a job as an example, or you're going through an interview, you need to really focus on your individual accomplishments. And when you're not used to thinking of it from that perspective, or saying what the military specifically did to make me a good civilian employee, that can be a challenge. And that's partly what the employment resource team went to try to tackle.
John, what was your biggest takeaway from your experience with our soldiers in Kuwait?
They're reflective of Minnesotans as a whole, and they are people who we can and should be incredibly proud of. They have done more in the last 10 years than almost any National Guard unit that's out there. Many of them have been on multiple deployments, and as Colonel or Chaplain John Morris, who led the delegation, said that what they were looking for is nothing to be given to them except a chance. They certainly seem to deserve that, and I think that given the efforts of the employment resource team of Minnesotans being able, to find a way to try to bring these veterans back successfully, I think they'll reintegrate really well and move on to lead the organizations that they join when they return.
John Rash, thanks so much for sharing your experiences with the employment research team and your visit to Kuwait in March.
Thank you for having me.
When Access Minnesota returns, we'll talk with Matthew Meyer, a Minneapolis lawyer who volunteers to help vets find jobs.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages.